everyone, I'm here with Josh Fox. We're going to be talking about an issue that is near and dear to his heart because one of his old teachers, someone who I think, Josh, you describe as your mentor, just was basically ousted or resigned at his job at a high school in the Bronx due to the way he taught the Israel and Palestine conflict. Basically, he didn't give complete deference to Israel, and apparently those views are no longer tolerated anymore. Josh, can you talk about it a little bit?
Let me just start off by saying Joel Doerfler, Mr. Doerfler to me, was my high school history teacher. At the time, the school that he taught at was the #1 ranked history department in all of America by U.S. News and World Report. And he was one of the brilliant people who created that program because of an incredible academic rigor and an incredible passion for really teaching a people's history. Okay, one of the first things that we learned when I was in high school was the people's history of the United States, Howard Zinn. And so when I think about history, I think about it in the current political context. I think about it as the most important thing that we can know as participants in a democracy. So when a history teacher who is celebrated, at one of these very prestigious schools, Riverdale is the school, is told that he can't teach a class, which is exactly what happened. He was teaching a class on Israel and Palestine, and he was told he could not teach that class. And then he resigned. And another professor or teacher at that school who was highly critical of Israel was fired. This is absolutely outrageous. That is not dissimilar to the Koch brothers somehow, taking evolution out of textbooks in the Midwest and in Texas. We have to understand history. We have to understand it from the deep and rich perspective of all of those trends of the participants, or else how can we possibly form an opinion about the present, about any controversial issue? And I'm sure it is appropriate to be incredibly critical of Israel and the way that they've handled, this recent round of protests in Gaza, the way that the settlements have gone, the apartheid-like structure that society has been under, which is racist, which is unfair, which treats Palestinians as second-class citizens, which subjects them to unbelievable living conditions and violence. So to really examine that, you have to be able to teach it.
Yeah, so throughout the country, the anti-Israel sentiment is ranging from being criminalized, which has been introduced on the federal level and in a variety of states with, anyone who supports BDS, their criminal action could be taken against them, to just basically incidents like this, firing dissenters, firing people who aren't completely supportive of this right-wing government in Israel. It doesn't mean that you can't support Israel, the creation of Israel, the existence of Israel, but people are saying no longer to this right-wing government. And even how this article was framed, the initial article in the New York Post, I know the New York Post is a right-wing rag, but this really stuck out to me. 2 history teachers lost their jobs at the Bronx private school after a parental uprising over how they communicated anti-Israel views to students. Redden, who's the other teacher, according to one parent, went on a classroom tirade against Israel and verbally attacked students. Redden told the Post he hadn't attacked anyone. So even in the media, I know the Post is right-wing, but even in the way they're framing it, it's as if anti-Israel. That's obviously not it.
Yeah, the New York Post is a rag, and it's a right-wing, misinformation machine. So you can't always, get accurate information. You can hardly ever get accurate information out of the Post. However, I'm not in the room with the class. I'm not at the class. And certainly my mentor, Joel Doerfler, was not the person who was being described as berating students. And I don't think that would probably happen. But I don't know. I can't speculate. I wasn't there. I will say this. I'm the grandson of Holocaust survivors. My grandparents arrived in New York City after not being able to relocate to their homeland in Poland after World War II, after fleeing the Nazis for 5 years. My uncle was shot in the eye as a little kid. They left. This country opened up its doors and welcomed them. And it's the importance of having a safe haven for Jews and for especially for people who suffered a genocide is really the creation of Israel, right? And so you have to be able to examine the thread of history. That cycle of violence is what is so upsetting to so many American Jews and Israeli Jews. That to think that Israel and Israel politics would have so flipped, right, to now be enforcing a racist doctrine, to now be committing acts which many people consider genocide, is so unbelievably upsetting and ironic and horrifying. So you have to be able to examine the history, right? Why did this happen? Well, okay, you can look and you can see the thread. World War I, the Treaty of Versailles punishes Germans. The Germans create the Freikorps. The Freikorps create the SS. The SS give rise to Hitler and the Nazis. They blame the Jews. A genocide. They kill 6 million Jews. Happens the incredibly tyrannical war of World War II. Then you see those Jews flee, and now, 60 years later, we have Jews acting in a way that is absolutely abhorrent towards Palestinians. You have to see the cycle of that to understand it, right? You have to see the cycle of violence, the cycle of abuse, the cycle of PTSD, the cycle of intergenerational trauma. And that means you teach a history class about it. You know what I mean? Whatever your view is on what's happening now, whatever your take on it is, you must teach the history. Without history, we are blind. Without understanding the thread that connects us to the past, we don't know what structure we're in right now. And how can you possibly change it? So added to that, we're in Riverdale High School, which is $50,000 a year to go to, right? So these are really wealthy children with really wealthy parents. I gave a guest lecture there last year. It was the students were popping. It's a very academically rigorous place. But what it seems like a group of very right-wing parents came together to decide that they didn't want their students learning history. And they got this class canceled, and Joel Doerfler, with the enormous integrity that he has, quits his job of 20 years, right? Head of the department, head of the history department. So I don't know what he's going to do next, but I want to take that class. I took more classes from Joel Doerfler probably than anybody in history. I took 12 classes, and I took Chinese history and German history and AP American history and third world development theory and model United Nations and film classes. The man made me who I am. He created the way I think. Everyone in America should have a teacher. So amazing. It's like, it makes me so upset to think that this man who has incredible integrity would somehow be not able to teach in this environment, in Trump's America. And it is so indicative, like you said, of those same people who are saying you can't boycott Israel. I have been invited to do writers' workshops in Jerusalem, and I turned them down. I said, I'm sorry, I can't go right now because of the situation in Gaza. I didn't publicize that, but I definitely said, no, I'm not going. This is a freedom of speech issue. It's our integrity as a nation, which seems to be so compromised in so many ways, to say that you can't boycott Israel. You can't have boycotts are a part of every political movement, from the civil rights movement to apartheid.
You talked about how the cyclical nature of what's going on in Israel and Palestine and Gaza, the cycle of abuse, the cycle of trauma, what Israel is kind of internalizing, and that right-wing reaction to that history. Did Mr. Doerfler teach you that? Is that kind of part of the way you see the world now? And is it kind of ironic in an awful way that he's become a casualty of that cycle?
Well, I don't think he's going to be a casualty for long. I mean, this is a man who is indomitable. But I would say, of course. Look, I got to say, when I got to that school in the 80s, I was in the 8th grade. I went through high school. I had just come out of public school in New York City, which was a complete disaster. And thank God I was able to go to this other school where Mr. Doerfler was teaching. And he shaped my whole education. The very first thing that I did was I went in 1985 to the anti-apartheid march in Central Park. And we were learning apartheid. We were learning how the system got created, right? When the white South Africans came, the system of the pass cards and the different racial classifications. And it is, very similar to what Palestinians go through in Israel. And that is a criticism waged at Israel that many people don't like. Oh, you can't compare it to this, you can't compare it to that. Well, there's a very active comparison. And I can remember, the last thing in high school that I did with Mr. Doerfler was we went to see Nelson Mandela at Yankee Stadium after he was freed and he became the president of South Africa in, I think it was 1990 or 1989. That was full circle. So what do we have to do now? We have to invest in looking at ourselves. We have to look at our own actions, and we have to be able to say, this is wrong, what's happening. This is unconscionable for Jews to be openly slaughtering peaceful protesters in the streets. And it is absolutely unconscionable in our America today, where we have a Trump figure who in many ways has a lot of those same characteristics of a demagogue, of the worst tyrants in history. And that we are inching towards that kind of behavior is extraordinarily scary. So we have to make examples of this type of thing. We have to put pressure on that administration at Riverdale and say, this is unreal. And I would love to see the whole world somehow, maybe TYT can arrange this, for Mr. Doerfler to teach his class for the rest of America. Let's just have the class online. Let him go ahead and do it. I want to take that class. I want to take every class that he's ever taught. I'd like to see that happen. And this is indicative of a very, very disturbing trend in America. We have to fight against it. We have to invest in the fact that yes, we can change these things. These things can turn around. That example of in 5 short years, protesting against apartheid, to Nelson Mandela arriving at Yankee Stadium, we have to believe that that's possible, and we have to turn this ship around because we're in trouble in America right now. And this is one of those things, you're right, very indicative of it.
You can say that again. Thanks, Josh. It was great talking to you as always, and Have a great day.
All right, thanks, Emma.